Candice and Elisa show. This week, we're going to talk about Hunter Biden, who has released his new memoir, Beautiful Things. Certainly, it's come with many criticisms and many accolades as well. As the son of the operating president in the White House, it's certainly a very topical book and something that hadn't really happened before. And this week, we're going to discuss the impact that someone's life has on yours when you are related. So Candice, obviously this is a topic we can both relate to very much. Would you like to take the lead on this?
I mean, honestly, I don't think it's just you and I that can relate. I think every human being on the planet, including Barack Obama, can relate to this. And it really is that, right? It's, for me, I think what really brought us to this place of wanting to discuss this is what I discovered, especially when I was just, going through news articles, is that there was this strong wave of people wanting Joe Biden to answer for what his son did, right? Because Hunter, of course, had like an incredibly tumultuous and tempestuous time with drugs, sex, and anything that could be photographed seems to have been photographed. And I don't know why he kept it on his laptop. I don't know why he would have, kept such incriminating evidence in so many ways. I'm just kind of blown away by that already.
And then forgotten his laptop at a repair shop is really the...
I mean, it's mind-blowing. Just the whole thing about how Hunter Biden just left all of this evidence on his laptop is crazy. But I think what I found really interesting is like all the conservatives, or Trump supporters, I'd say, were like, Joe Biden has got to answer for his son, and, because Hunter's a shame to, the United States of America. And I just found it very hypocritical, because I just thought to myself, like just a few years ago, the then sitting president of the United States was saying some of the most debaucherous things we'd seen from a candidate in a very long time. And he was talking about grabbing women by the pee. He was talking about, different ways that, he could manipulate people. He was just not a great human being. And he wasn't asked by the very same people who were asking Joe Biden to answer for someone else's decision-making. The very person who was responsible for the action, being Trump at the time, was not asked to answer for what he said and how he said it and why he said it. And so for me, that just gave me a bit of a raised eyebrow and a pause, because I think each and every human being who's listening to this can relate to the fact that sometimes you can love people, whether they people you've chosen, like romantic partner or friend, or their family, and they can do things that are just not in your control. And you have to be like, damn, then it becomes whether you choosing to stay with that person or not, So I don't know. What do you feel?
Yeah, I think sometimes we get too fixated on that saying that says one rotten apple rots them all, right? And I think we're losing sight of the fact that when we're talking about inanimate objects, that is true. But in the case of humans, you do have that ability to choose your own path and remove yourself from a lot if you think that it's rotting, or a person that you feel is not really acting in a way that you would align with, right? I think it's complicated because, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm sure that this happens to you as well, that you have friendships or acquaintances or colleagues where you're so aligned in certain areas. And then there are certain areas that you just have discrepancies. And it begs the question, are we able to connect to other people, even though they're doing things that we don't condone or approve of? Or must we draw a boundary, a hard boundary? And I actually feel like it's dangerous to just have this blanket idea that the moment one person does something that doesn't align with your belief system, you must draw that hard line, because we're living in a world of such division and otherness that, if anything, we need to be finding ways to bridge gaps and reconnect despite our differences. In this particular instance, I mean, I'm completely with you on the conservative reactions and how they're trying to impose something on Joe Biden that really has not to do with Joe Biden's decisions. I'm sure Joe Biden didn't go, I will want a son that will be a drug addict. He didn't. He's fought for him, perhaps not always in the best possible way, but what person knows exactly the best way to act at all times? So I think that placing this on Joe Biden, when Hunter Biden is a grown adult that makes his own decisions, Our parents cannot dictate who we become as people in the world. Otherwise, we might as well just be clones and replicas of the people who raised you. And the reality is that we're not. We have choice to learn from where we came from and decide who we wish to become. Sometimes it aligns, and sometimes you deviate 180 degrees. Placing that burden on Joe Biden, I think, is not only inaccurate, but we're also missing the ability to open up the discussion about drugs, as we were talking about last week, and alcohol, and how prevalent a problem in society they are. Now we have an acting president that is dealing with it himself. So this is something that so many millions of people deal with. I just think that it should be a door to communicate about it more. How do you feel?
Cool. No, I love that, because I just think it's so interesting how society is so quick to define, right? And I think it is like we're living in a wave where everyone is fighting to be unique, but at the same time, everyone's fighting for a label, right? Like I am either like, non-conformist, or I am this, or this is my pronoun, or this is my, we're all trying to put ourselves into these boxes instead of just saying, I am a human being who is currently experiencing reality. Maybe I don't need a title at this time because I'm still figuring it out. And I think that's what leads to cancel culture. Our need to almost pounce on, ideologies that sometimes really don't relate to you at a core level, but your urge or need for belonging puts you in this group of people that's like, yeah, everyone's, thinking Joe Biden needs to, apologize for his son's behavior. And I'm like, we cannot apologize for other people. Right? Like, yes, there is a courtesy element to it. Like, of course, if I invite you out for dinner and I bring a friend of mine and let's say my friend starts acting out of control, yes, I will take it upon myself to say, listen, I brought you into this environment. I'm aware of how crazy this person was going to be acting, and I apologize. And I'm so sorry that, that's what you were exposed to. This is not a reflection on me, but it's just how it unfortunately unfolded.
Yeah.
That's it. Right? And we have to give people the room to be human.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's the problem with cancel culture. You're not allowed to be human. You're not allowed to misspeak once. You're not allowed to have a tweet from when you were 14. Yeah. I mean, the amount of times that I see a headline about someone being fired because they said one inappropriate thing when they were 14, not showing, let's say, maybe like a history of being racist or a history of homophobia or a history of anything, but maybe it was just the lingo at the time. Because I think what we struggle to come to terms with as society is there was a lot of stuff that was very acceptable and very within mainstream media back then that yes, now we look back on and we frown upon, right? Like back then, blackface, yes, it was still a thing, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is now. Like, whoa, this is actually crazy. Now, if you're going to take out a picture from someone when it was like a thing and it wasn't as taboo and it wasn't as like critiqued back when it's like 16, 17, and you're going to take that out and like say this is who this person is. I think that is ridiculous. And I think unfortunately that's where society's heading. And I, part of me just almost like I'm afraid of what we're becoming as a society.
Yeah, no, and I actually, so much of what you were saying was resonating with me and making me question ideas. Like, if you take things far enough back, I mean, there's a day and age in humanity where slavery was perfectly acceptable somehow. And people thought that this was the thing to do, and you're born into a plantation house and you are the girl in the plant. And somehow this is normal, right? Fast forward enough time, thank God we're getting to a place where we're, looking at that as bad. But the reality is that even today, if we look at the leading societies in the world, we're not there. Black people, as we have talked, numerous times, are still facing huge amounts of discrimination, complete disparity in the workforce, fear walking down the street. That shouldn't be the case. I mean, this is ongoing. So inevitably, my hope is that when we look 10 years ahead and we look back at this time, we still consider this time to be the dark ages by contrast to where we should be, right? Yeah. So if we are judging at every stage of history, especially when things in the age of technology are evolving so rapidly. I mean, when I was in university, I remember there were like, I think it was LGBT groups. Yes. Then it became LGBTQ. Then it became LGBTQI. Now it's LGBTQIA+. Eventually we're going to have, and it's not a bad thing, is that we're just learning that there are new tastes and new ideas that we hadn't acknowledged before. And yet, like you are saying, by doing that, we are also becoming more differenced. I am this, but not that, and that, but not this. So you can speak to that, but you can't speak to this. And you can hold an opinion about that, but not that. So our lines of communication become so fractured and also so fragile that I feel sometimes that we're walking on blown glass, you know, like this blown glass menagerie where you don't want to do anything because you might cause something and then your reputation is going to go down the tubes, right? That's dangerous. It's difficult, right?
Oh, that fragility. That's exactly it. And I fear it because I know that if you are in the public eye long enough, you are, especially in today's day and age, you are bound to say something that someone thinks is worth canceling. And I just look at it and I just think we're suffocating people. We're not allowing people to be who they truly are. We're not allowing people to say what they actually want to say. And therefore, we are not making correct assessments on who people are. Because if everyone is speaking PC and everyone is speaking in the most framed and boxed way, we never really get to hear and know what someone thinks, feels, you know, has an opinion about. And for me, it's kind of like, if we applied this mentality to, like, let's say racism or apartheid or whatever back then, and we said, okay, cool, you're not allowed to speak on Black issues because you're not Black, we would get literally nowhere, right? You're not allowed to speak on women's issues because you're not a woman. We would have gotten absolutely nowhere. The women marched to, like, you know, to speak to men in Congress to say, we need you guys to work with us in order to bring more women into the workforce. We were looking for allies. We were looking for solutions. We were looking for progression, and we were looking to move forward. And it didn't matter who spoke to it as long as you were with me, right? As long as you understood what the cause was and you were willing to support it. Now we're on this very strange thing where, like, I'm afraid to post things about, like, Asian hate, because I'm like, oh, you know, if I say, you know, stop Asian hate, and because I'm not an Asian woman, and, like, you know, how am I supposed to, like, speak to it without being sensitive to it and post about, and then it leaves all of us in the same place where it's like, I'll rather do nothing, because if I do nothing, I can't get in trouble for saying something wrong or incorrectly, even though it was well-intentioned, right? And I think because we're raising such a hyper-policing society, everyone is being policed. Everyone thinks they are the police. Everyone wants to be the, you know, the first person who's outraged. And I think the biggest, probably one of the most definitive articles I've read about our time, and I really hope I'll find it again, was about the idea and identity of outrage. Right? And basically they were talking about, like, in today's society, outrage is so quickly rewarded that people actually get like, you know, they get a surge from being the first to be outraged, because then they know they're going to be the first to train, the first to lead the movement, the first to do this. But the problem with that is, when you're the first to be outraged, you probably took the least time to understand the situation. And so then now we're living in a culture whereby everyone is outraged. I'm angry, you angry either. And so now it feels like everyone's just speaking. And because there's so many voices, you're listening to none, right? And so I feel like you're saying we are so much more divided when we should be so much closer together. And there's certain things you can understand about back then that can't come here, but, like, you can understand it from today's premise. Like, I had a conversation with a guy the other day, and he was saying, he was, like, you know, very, like, irate that a friend of his was now dating a Black woman, because back then during apartheid, because they lived in South Africa, and back then during apartheid, because I was speaking to a white man, and so he was saying, no, when I dated a Black woman during apartheid, like, this very friend of mine was outraged. And he was like, you know, you can't date this woman, because if you date this woman, you know, like, it doesn't make sense. There's too much cultural clash and and it's just not right, right? This was his friend's mentality. And now fast forward 20 years later, his friend is dating a Black woman. And now the friend is outraged because he's like, when I did it, you told me all of this. But I had to say to the friend, I'm like, you were in a different time. I'm like, your whole conditioning in society was telling you one thing. And I'm like, yes, good for you. Good for you that you chose that. This is wrong. I understand it. And I still love this Black woman. I'm like, it took your friend a little longer, but it doesn't mean that they need to be punished for their frame of thinking then, right? And so if we keep boxing,
that's powerful. You saying that is very powerful, because you're South African, you're a Black woman. And I think but that level of empathy and understanding is so momentous to me, because it feels like, if only we could reflect upon the things that affect us with that level of empathy and understanding. I mean, wow, the world would be like, it would be incredible, right? Like, I think it's very moving, your perspective.
Oh man. And you know, and I thank you for it, but I think, you know, it is, for me, I feel like if we don't all start adopting this way of looking at life and, understanding that, like, yes, there are people who are malicious and they have that intention of causing destruction and anarchy, but so many more people really want to move things forward. So many people actually want to be on the right side of history. So many people really want to make the right decisions. But if we keep talking in divisive tones, and I say to you, you're a Latin woman who translates, as a white woman, right? You can, like, people can perceive you as being white. And if you say something for, like, Black women, let's say Black women are going through something, and everyone attacks you for it, like, that would piss me off. And it continues to piss me off, the way Anne Hathaway was attacked, the way, so many other people were attacked during the Black Lives Matter movement, because I'm like, yes, it is a Black situation, but it's also a systematic issue. And if we cannot all come together and completely agree that this is not about Black or white, this is about changing systems that were created at a time to benefit, what was happening.
Yeah.
And now we can move forward together and say, this is no longer how we're living, and therefore we need to change the ways we constructed these laws, right?
Yeah.
And so I just feel like right now we're just ebbing in this weird space of social media activism that's actually not doing much for the world.
I mean, I think we separate these lines. There is a firm line that I see in these cases with Stop Asian Hate, with Black Lives Matter and everything, is I am able to speak to something from a level of empathy, not personal understanding. But I think that completely disregarding humans' capacity for empathy, it's what's leading us to becoming less empathetic. If I empathize with your experience and make a passionate post about how unfair it's been, I probably would be crucified because it's not my experience. But where's the room for empathy? We need a world that's more empathetic. And if I see my fellow human getting completely screwed over, and this is unacceptable, we also need to leave room for the voices that are advocating for another. I think that it's very delicate because obviously we cannot, I think sometimes when you have a crusade, I've spoken for sexual violence, it's much easier to speak about sexual violence because when people ask you, why are you doing this? You go, well, because I'm a sexual violence survivor. And immediately they go, check, you're able to speak about this. You have enough information. But, what if I want to speak about child soldiers? What if I want to speak about other causes? Obviously, I haven't gone through that experience, but we need the advocate voices because otherwise these topics go under the radar, right? And I just feel that there's got to be an understanding that yes, there's race. Yes, there's, sexual orientation. Yes, there's personal trauma experience. But above all, we are all human. We're only here for a limited point. We're all born and we're all gonna die. That is shared experience. And we're all living in the same house. Call it Earth. We get too derailed by geography and language, forgetting the underlying truths that we are still all human. We've completely lost sight of this. And so I feel that there's got to be room to approach these issues from empathy. Otherwise, all of our ships are going to sink, because when the tide rises, all ships rise. Everybody goes up, whether you like it or not. So if we're putting something positive for each other out into the world, I can only see the vessels rising. I can't see it falling. It's just got to come from a place of understanding and empathy. But it's very hard because this, as you said, this culture of outrage and just short-fusedness, and perhaps it begs the question, why are we that short-fused? Why are we so ready to attack? Where's the hurt?
Pain. Exactly. And that's it. Like, exactly when you said it, I was like, where is the pain? And I think that's it. And I think in my talk, the one thing I always emphasize to people, and I say, you know what, even if you don't believe in the concept or idea or identity of forgiveness, I'm like, what it has given me, and I am sure it will give you, should you choose to take this path, because it is always a choice, is you will be able to control your emotions, because whatever controls your emotions controls your life. If someone outrages you, they're the one in power. If someone is the one who triggers you, they're the one in power. I'm like, if you don't give that emotional remote control to every Tom, Dick, and Harry, then you can always think clearly in the face of adversity, right? Like, I'm not outraged by people saying outrageous things online. I'm not outraged when strangers attack me. I'm not outraged when I see someone having tweeted something racist. I'm not outraged when someone is sexist. I'm not outraged. Yes, I clear my mind of any emotional feeling and attachment. I'm like, this is clearly a wrong thing to do. And then I take the logical approach as to how do we eradicate this? How do we move this forward? And how do we change it? But I think a lot of people get so stuck in the emotion of outrage, the emotion of anger, that guess what? We never actually get to the table where we are changing the law, we're changing constitution, we're changing the things that can be changed.
Yes.
And that's what I always like have emphasized in terms of movements. That when like it's so much easier for, let's say if you were marching against me and I get people to start tweeting racist like stuff, right? Let's say you're coming against me and I start getting people to either tweet things that are alluding to racism or sexism or whatever that I know is going to trigger you. Guess what? By the time you sit down with me, you are so ruled by anger and emotion, you think any little win is a win, right? If I to just be like, oh man, I'm so sorry, you know, our company has realized how remorseful we are. So we only get, but we can only afford 3,000 Rand remuneration because, you know, like, you know, we understand that you're in pain, that because you're not seeing the woods from the trees, you're just like, okay, I knew I'd get you where I wanted you. When you clear-headed, you're like, that's not what I came here for. I don't need your money. What I need you to do is change the policies in your company that is inflicting this upon people,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think because, like you're saying, I think if ever we're living in a time, and I just want your opinion on this before we have to close off, is I feel like we're living in a time more so than ever where more people are living with pain that's unaddressed than I've seen in a very long time. And because we're living with this unprocessed pain, we're seeing how it acts out in cancel culture and in all these different arenas.
100%. I think, and especially now, we've just gone through this huge period of isolation, huge period of, you know, very intense family experiences for many people, lots of domestic abuse, lots of mental health issues rising. But at the core, I think for me, we have to stop moving away from social media being the ultimate goal, because having 10,000 or 1 million likes on social media doesn't actually change the structure. It's a band-aid culture. Social media to me is relevant and important because it raises things to the mass awareness, but it doesn't actually create the structural changes necessary to no longer be committing the problems that are being raised. So yeah, anyways, big topic today, and certainly something as per usual that could last forever. But guys, we'd love to hear your opinion, your comments on how you're experiencing these things today, where you see things going, and how we could possibly work all together. Are we allowed to advocate for other causes? Where are the lines? What are the boundaries? Let us know, and we look forward to seeing you next week.